All right, here we are in episode 6, I think. Yeah, 6 sounds right. But we're going to start episode 6 here with some panel line washes. So, just kind of episode 6 is kind of be weathering with panel line washes, some oil work, some small detail stuff, basically getting up to final assembly. And hopefully, part 7 is the end of it. But this one, for right now, we're going to start out with some of these Ammo MIG panel liners. I love these things. They are great. They're easy to use. They dry fast. They're easy to remove with, Q-tips, cotton buds. You don't really need to break out any enamel spirits or mineral spirits to clean them up. They just kind of wipe right off. And after they stick in the panel lines there, you can do some manipulating. You can add some shading and shadowing with them, depending on how you use them. So for the bottom, for the gray, I'm going to use Storm Gray, which is MIG 1609. I'll use that for all the gray surfaces. And then for the inside, I mentioned earlier on when I did the undercarriage bay that I was going to add washes and that stuff there. So for that, I'm going to be using green brown, which is the same kind of color I used in the cockpit for kind of wear and tear and grease and grime to add some shadows in there. I also need to, before I even do that, I have to fix some overspray I have in this back section of the landing gear bay that happened during paint. So I have to fix that first. And then topside and for the white areas, I'll be using these two colors. So I'll be using neutral brown 1614, which will be for the dark brown color and on the green. I think it's a good enough shade where it won't be too overpowering. Like if I use something this dark, I think it'd be a little bit too stark. But I think this will be good. And then for the white parts, I'll be using sand camo, ochre for sand camo, and this is 1622. Okay, so I went and did some touch-ups in the wheel bay with this MRP 317 anti-corrosive color. All I did was I just laid down some masking tape along this back edge, and then I sprayed in at an angle here, so I touched that all in. And then I also needed to mask off this little like support brace in the middle. So while I had that back piece of masking tape in, I just took a piece of Tamiya masking tape, laid it on top, sprayed it at an angle to get this little like wedge in here. And then I just removed the mask, put it on this side, and painted it as well. So that's all touched up and looking good. And we can now go ahead and start to move on to doing some panel line washes. So, all right, so I'm gonna start in the undercarriage bay here. Like I said, I'm gonna use green brown 1612. And I'm going to use one of the smaller brushes. So I want this to be pretty neat because it's going to be hard to get in here and clean up afterwards. But like I said, the stuff is pretty awesome in the fact that it can just kind of be removed with a cotton bud. So I'm going to use this small brush, and I'm just going to work my way around. I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, for Storm Gray, or for we're gonna use Storm Gray for the gray, which is 1609 from MIG. Like I said, always shake this stuff up. This stuff separates really quickly, so while you're working, it tends to separate, and you just gotta shake it. Same kind of thing. I'm gonna use this small brush again and treat it as a panel liner. So this does have a gloss coat on it, so it just kind of, you just got to tap it along. And it shoots along with capillary action pretty well. So the panel liner is starting to separate here, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pause, give it a shake, and I'm going to finish up the rest of the underside with this color, and then I'll show you what I do with the darker gray. Okay, so for the flat panel lines and the control surfaces where there's an actual, like, you know, it's a mechanical break, I'm going to use this deep gray 1602 to kind of emphasize those a little bit more. So I did the rest of the lighter gray color. That just needs to dry, so I'll do this while this is doing its thing. All right, let that dry and then we'll remove it. All right, so most of this is dry on the gray parts, it looks like. So like I said, you can just use a good old-fashioned cotton swab for this, and all you gotta do is wipe at it. And for the most part, it will just keep the panel liner in the panel line. And while you're doing this, if you notice that, like, a certain area, the wash got pulled out or it's not as defined, you can always go back and add wash over it. Or in my case, what I like to do is when I come back with oils, I can use oils to refine the area as well. There we go. So that's all the gray pretty much done. I still haven't removed it on the small parts, but this is looking pretty good. So I'm gonna wait another couple minutes and I'll remove the inside of the gear bay off camera, and then we can move on to the top side. So as I've been working around the underside, like I said, I found some panel lines that just aren't as deep. So what I did is I just went with a sharp, flexible needle, and I just kind of carved at the panel line a little bit, and then I added another layer of, you know, whatever panel line color I needed. So, you know, like in this little back of the flap area, I added some of the, where is it, deep gray, and then some other little spots where the storm gray is. I've kind of done some work on some panel lines just to make them more refined. So I'll just wait for that to dry out, and then we can see how we're looking, and if everything's looking good, we can go ahead and move on to the top side. Right, so the brown wash has been added to the top side, and then the darker gray has been put into the control surfaces. So now I'm just sitting and waiting for everything to dry. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. Once it gets removed, hopefully it'll look a lot better. So we'll come back in a couple minutes. All right, all the panel liner washes have been applied, removed with a handful of these cotton buds, and it's looking pretty good. I had to go back a couple times and refine a couple areas and go back and apply some extra panel liner, but it's looking good right now, so we can move on to the next part. So what I want to do before I move on to any more weathering is I want to seal all of the panel liner in place. So for that, since I'm going to do oils next, I'm going to put down some MRP Super Clear Matte Varnish. So this will seal everything in and it will prepare the surface for the next phase, which will be oil paint rendering. So I got the airbrush loaded up with some MRP Super Clear Matte, and I'm just going to dust this on here with the PS771. Got some good flow. I just kind of go panel by panel, flatten this down. And this is just shooting at about 15 psi, so it's not getting blasted on here crazily. Just a light dusting. I'll probably take a couple coats. But like I said, just move panel by panel, hit each panel. The decals are looking good. I don't see any silvering, which is good. All right, so as I was filming, spraying the flat coat, my memory card filled up and the camera turned off. So yeah, everything's gotten a flat coat of MRP flat or matte. And I always like when you get a matte coat on a subject. It just kind of makes it look more the part. So this is looking pretty good. So we're ready now to go move on to some oil rendering. All right, so I just set up my color palette for oils, and I'm using this 502 Abteilung oil paints. And I basically, I think if any of you watch any, Mike Rinaldi or any guys who do any oil paint rendering, they kind of do the same thing. Piece of cardboard, you put your little dots of your oil paint on cardboard. It leaches out the linseed oil from the paints. It makes it dry faster and matter. The way I like to work is I start with my lightest colors up top, and I kind of work my way in the color, not wheel, but spectrum down. So up here is faded white, which is this Abteilung ABT 165. And then working this way, this is faded gray, neutral gray, Payne's gray, and then these are kind of like the, greasier, filthier colors as they get darker. So this is Starship Filth, which is a great color. Engine grease, as you can see, this one's a little juicy, so it's going to take some time to dry out. And then some smoke, also a little juicy. And then down here at the bottom is some shadow brown. And then kind of working my way up is raw umber, burnt umber, industrial earth, olive green, buff, cream brown, and then dust is this one in this bag up here. There's a hole in it, so I'm just keeping it secure so it doesn't leak all over my bin. So I just laid this stuff down now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna set this palette off to the side for 30 minutes, an hour, and let all the oil leach out of it, and then I will start going about application process. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth when we come back, and this is all ready to go. All right, so the oils have had about an hour to kind of leach out, and you can see all this, that's all the oil, or the linseed oil that's leached out of these. So these are ready to go, and we can start applying them to the model. I'm gonna start on the underside first. I'm just gonna put this off to the side, and then for this, I'll be using a variety of brushes I have pulled off to the side here. These are King Art brushes. Mike Rinaldi recommends these. They keep tips very well. So I got a couple of number 2 rounds for these guys. So I have, a couple of those. Then I have a flat grass comb, a 1/8 angle shader, a 10-0 round, which is a tiny little pointy brush, a number 2 shader, and then a 5-0 spotter brush to apply pinpoint with the oils. And then as far as thinners go, I use this Abteilung 502 odorless thinner. Okay, so I just realized I wasn't filming, but I did this rear stabilizer on the bottom for a couple minutes, talking to myself if the camera isn't rolling. But let me zoom in here, readjust the camera a little bit. So as you can see in here, there's a little bit of staining around the control surface here. And what I do is there's One brush is used for the application of the oil. So I have this one here, which is applying, I'm just using raw umber right now. And then my biggest problem that I have when I do this, I am no expert at OPR. I am still learning every build, trying to get by. But basically, it's all about your consistency that you get with your oils on the palette. So I usually get a little bit of thinner on the tip of my brush, get into the oils here a little bit, and I kind of play with the consistency on the palette a little bit. And I see how it flows on my paper towel. So you want the color to be workable. So I'll try to show it on this other tail plane here. So I'm just gonna, hopefully my head doesn't get in the way. I'm just gonna map this out. That's a little bit too thin. Also way too thin. Like I said, I'm still working on my paint consistency here. So that's in there, and then this brush just has thinners on it. Oops. It's a clean brush, just light thinners. And then I can go ahead and move the oils around with the brush to where I want it. And just keep that brush clean. So a little bit more thinner on the end of the brush here. You can really just kind of move the oils where you want it. Let that dry for a couple minutes. Right there, I just moved the oils around to get some slight streaking off of that hinge. Now I can just refine it by moving the oils around. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm gonna leave that alone. I'm gonna get some of this oil out of this corner here, so I'm just gonna remove that. And I want another slight streak off of this guy. Hopefully all that was in focus. When I looked up, the camera was not in focus. So with this other brush, I'm just going to clean up here a little bit. This brush is also just slightly dampened with thinners. You should kind of use that like an eraser. So I kind of have that going there, some streaks. This one's actually not straight. Oops, wrong brush. It's a little bit of thinner back on the brush. You don't want it too wet, or otherwise you just kind of erase your work. So I'm just going to try to straighten that out a little bit, because streaks should be straight. So yeah, so that's some grime in that control surface with a little bit of streaking on it. I'm going to go and refine this a little bit and add some streaks to that side. So now I'll get my other brush that's just for the oil. Get my blending, or the dry brush again, a little bit of thinner on the tip. Get most of it off on the paper towel, and then start moving that around. This, I want to move the oil close to the panel line, and then drag it back a little bit. Take this flat brush, and I'm just going to clean up a little bit of here, drag some of it back. So looking like that. So I'm kind of cool with that for now. Like I said, I'm just using a raw umber right now. Use this as an eraser again. Okay, like that. So, like I said, I'm gonna go work my way up towards the main wing and get that going. And then I will come back when I'm done and show you where I'm at. All right, so that's the first phase of oils done with the raw umber. Just kind of mapping out some dirt and grime, a little bit of streaks. So that's looking pretty good. Here, I'll zoom out a little bit more. But yeah, it's not, I don't want it to be too filthy. You know, it's kind of want it to look used. So I'm gonna let, it's getting late, so I'm gonna let this kind of do its thing, and then tomorrow I'll go with a couple darker tones and do some more streaking and some, you know, some tonal variety in there with the oil. So that's looking pretty good. Let it sit overnight. Oils last pretty long, and to kind of prolong them, you can put your palette in like a Tupperware bin. So I have this small one here. I'm just gonna drop that in there like so. Put the top on, and then I'm gonna go put this in the refrigerator in the house, and it will keep the oils from expiring too soon. So we'll come back and we'll do some more on the bottom, and then we'll flip it over to the top, and I'll try to hopefully on the top side show you a little bit more than what I did on the tail planes here. So we'll come back in a little bit. All right, coming back to it. It's been like a day since I did the what was that, raw umber on the underside, and it's all kind of locked in there, so I can go. So like I said, I like to work light to dark. So I'm gonna now go a little bit darker in some specific areas, show a little bit more, you know, staining and that kind of stuff. So as you can see, my palette has leached out even more than where it was the other day, and you know, it was stored those couple days in this Tupperware container, and now coming back to work on the palette, I'm going to take a little bit of the mineral spirits that I have in my little cup here, just a smidge, with a little pipette, as you can see here, and I'm just going to go over the top of my next darker color, which is going to be Industrial Earth. And we're just going to focus on some of these, you know, like little hinges for the flaps, you know, make them a little bit darker, some darker streaks in some certain areas. and go. So my paint consistency is going to be as I start to work in here. So I'm just going to kind of map out some areas. I'll do some random dots in some areas to get some darker tones. Alright, so now with the clean brush, it's just very, very lightly moistened with the mineral spirits that are over on the side here. So now I'm going to start blending in the oils here. So I'm just kind of tapping and moving the oils along. Zoom out here so you can kind of see when I go off the subject what's going on. So right over here is my thing of mineral spirits, kind of off to the side of the camera. I have it kind of off the side so I don't put my sleeve of my jacket into the oils. But usually when I go off the subject, I'm either going into the mineral spirits and getting a little bit on the tip of my brush, and then I'm going over here and I'm getting most of it off, and then I'll go and work the oils that I just mapped out. And then I'll go back over here and I'll kind of wipe off some of the oil paint that's on the brush. I'm just really kind of just tapping the brush with the very tip of this number 2 round and just moving them into place. Every so often rolling, so I'm keeping a nice tip on this brush. This is kind of heavy here, so I put a little more thinner on the brush to let this flow a little bit more. I want to get this crack around this hinge for the landing flap. Maybe it's a little greasy. So I'm doing this, I'm just barely touching the model and moving this along. I'm gonna leave this kind of big clunky area or clumpy area, and I'm gonna streak that in a minute. I'm just gonna go blend the rest of this. So yeah, you're just pushing the oils where you want them. That's the good thing about this. You can kind of manipulate them with the brush right into the corners and crannies, and you can kind of like feather them out so you can get some different tones in these areas that I worked the other night, and just kind of stipple them in. What I'll do in a minute is I'm going to break out a different brush and blend this a little bit more. It's looking pretty good. And then you can notice I have this big old clump of oil right here. That's another thing I'm going to streak out as well. So I'm blending these ones on the radiator here. And I just kind of work like a half of the underside here. I'll work a half, get everything's looking nice, then I'll work over here. So I'm gonna go back to my oil brush here. So I have this one is just like this. This one has a piece of tape on it. That's my clean brush basically. I'm gonna come over here, make it a little bit of thinner. I'm gonna get some of the paint. I'm gonna check the consistency. Maybe a little bit of thinner. There we go. I'm gonna add some more of this kind of like, oh, it's a little bit too chunky. I'm just gonna add couple dots here to get some darker, kind of like grime in this panel, because this is right behind the landing gear. Like so. Get my blending brush damp. All right, for streaking, I use this 1/8 flat grass comb brush, and I'm going to get this pretty damp with thinners. And then I'm just going to go over the area where the kind of the clump is, and I'm just going to drag it back like so. And the big thing with streaks is you want them to be straight. You know, there's guys who, you know, get a straight edge and will do it, but I always kind of get it going. And then I'll go back. Whoops. Don't drop your brushes on the ground. Almost did it twice. So now I'm going to go back with the pointer brush, the round, get that pretty damp with mineral spirits, and now I'm going to kind of refine that streak. So I'm just going to kind of move it along. Brush is a little bit too wet. There's a piece of phlegm on here. Move that. Like so. Then I'm going to have to move this around a little bit to refine this streak. So that's some just light streaking coming out of the back of the, you can't see it again. Some light streaks here coming out of the back of this radiator. So, yeah, so I'm going to work my way with the darker color going, you know, to this other side of the aircraft, and then I'll come back. Hopefully that kind of showed you how you can manipulate stuff. I know I didn't do a very good job with the lighter color showing things, but I'm going to go work this a little bit more, add some of that darker color, blend it in and get it looking part, and I'll come back. And that should probably, hopefully, wrap up the bottom side. I might go one color darker, probably like this engine grease or Starship filth that's over here, and this add a couple areas of darker staining, and then maybe a little bit of dust work. So I will come back when I wrap up. All right, so I added a couple darker tones to the underside here in a couple different methods. So as we left off, I worked my way around with the industrial earth. I did it on both sides, darkened up some areas. And then I used some engine grease and did some speckling, and then to add a couple more, and then I blended them in. And then last, I added some dark streaks of Starship filth kind of up here, just to, you know, add a little extra, a little variation. But if you zoom in here, you can see the speckling work. You know, this area seems pretty kind of dirty with the landing gear and, you know, crap coming out of the gear doors and, you know, access panels and stuff like that. So, you know, I've made that pretty dirty and grimy in there. And then, you know, if you kind of zoom out, control surfaces are the next kind of filthy area. And that's about as far as I want to go with the control surfaces like that. So what I'm going to plan on do now is I'm going to lock this in. I'm going to hit it with a hair dryer, make sure it's nice and secure, and I'll probably leave it overnight to do its thing, and then I'll do a little bit of dust work behind the landing gear as well, and that'll probably be done with an airbrush. That'll just be lightly thinned dust color, so like a buff or something like that, and just kind of randomly spray it in and make sure it's not too stark. I just noticed that there are some speckles here. I need blended a little bit more. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm taking some Ammo's liquid mask, which is this blue stuff right here. And I got a little bit on this little dental palette here and with some sponge. And I'm just kind of making some random things. And this is to kind of break up the opacity, or not the opacity, the coverage of, I guess that's the same thing, But I'm gonna spray like a dust tone, a light dusting behind the undercarriage to get you know, some dust color on there. Some dust has been kicked up by the undercarriage. It's just going to kind of help randomize it a little bit. So I'm going to mix up a color. It's a light dusty color. So I'm going to use some of these inks from Liquitex. And it's going to be mostly this neutral gray with maybe just a drop of this raw sienna to get kind of a dusty color. So I'm going to go tinker around with that, and then when I get it prepared, I'll come back and I'll just kind of do the light spraying of it and show you what the color looks like. So back in a minute. All right, so I mixed up those Liquitex inks, and then I got a color that kind of looks like this in the color cup. Like I said, it's probably, I didn't really pay attention to the ratios, but it's probably, you know, it's about 95% this neutral gray, and then it's just, the rest is just drop by drop, getting it to get that color with this sienna color. This can very quickly overpower the gray, so just got to be careful with that. And then it's thinned with this Tamiya X20A to make it flow out of the airbrush pretty well. So, like I said, this is super duper thin now. And I'm just going to spray, make sure I'm not going too heavy here. I'm just going to lightly dust. Like I said, this is super thin, just want to build it up. We wanted to overpower things. I'm just kind of making little clouds and circles, working my way back from the landing gear. Let that dry for a minute or two. Okay, so you can see I added some more of the ammo liquid mask, a lot heavier and denser in areas. And then I mixed up this color, which is a little bit darker. And this is going to be a very, very light coat on things. So I think the liquid mask needs another minute to dry. So I'll come back in a second. Like I said, just rub your finger over it. So yeah, it looks like that. Some light dusting. That's good color to do some, you know, post shading around the panels as well. And the good stuff about using this Liquitex ink stuff, if you put it down and you don't like it, if you get some 409 cleaner, you can wipe it all off and it won't affect MRP paint. The MRP paint's impervious to it. So you could go down and just scrub it all off and then go from there. So it's a good little way to do some dusting down there that doesn't look too stark. You still see all the weathering that we did underneath it, and it's in a good spot. So yeah, we'll move to the top side now. So before I got ready to flip it over to start doing OPR on the top, I just took a little bit of MRP Super Matte Clear varnish, and I just kind of sealed in those inks from last night because they are a little fragile and they don't like overhandling. But you know, the jig will kind of protect it on how it's going to lay. But so the only thing that got done after the OPR, normally I don't add a flat coat over OPR. It usually dries flat and looks pretty good. So I try to just keep it restricted to this dusting area in behind the landing gear, on this radiator, and on these tail planes back here. So just a light coat, just something to just kind of give it some protection. But we are now ready to give it the good old flip over. And we can start going with some OPR on the top side. All right, so kind of my plan of attack is to work the wings first on both sides, the horizontal stabilizers, and then I'll work to the fuselage. And I also got to remember I got to wrap around the camo of the wings and the nose and the bottom side of the tail. So I'll work the wings and then I'll move on to the fuselage. So I'll kind of do a little bit of this on camera, and then I'll kind of do what I did before and cut back later, and I'll come back and show you what I did. Was mapping out some grime that's going to happen around that control surface here. Right now, that's kind of how the wing is mapped out. Right now, so I'm just going to give that a minute to kind of do its thing. And then I will start to blend. So I'm just going to give that a minute. Got my blending brush, a little damp with mineral spirits over off to the side here. And now I'm just going to kind of start to blend some of these dots in. Just want kind of that sense of grime and some discoloration on the surface. And some of these harder lines that I mapped out, I'm going to start to blend out along this panel line here. I left it very heavy in here because, you know, wing root is also close to the walkway for the pilot and ground crew. So that's going to be a little bit heavier and grimier. It's also a little bit thicker of a oil that I put in there, so I'm getting a little more thinner. Hope my head is not blocking the camera here. This detail right here is a raised detail, so I imagine some dust and dirt would accumulate around that. So that'll be a little bit dirtier. These little dots of oil, you can really kind of stretch along the surface with enough, you know, not too much mineral spirits, but just enough, and you can just kind of like push them around, and you can get some kind of like, you know, staining type looks. Just make sure that you blend them out so it doesn't leave like a tide mark. That's kind of the only thing that could happen with these that looks unnatural. A little bit too much thinner. And I think I mentioned it when I was doing the underside. You gotta really be paying attention to how much thinner you have on your brush. If it just completely blows out your oils on, you know, sure, that may be what you want. But sometimes you just got way too much thinner. It just completely blows out and makes the oils run everywhere. I don't want that. I want them to kind of be a little bit more controlled. So it's just a little game you have to play, a little mini game as you're doing blending, because that consistency is going to change based on what you want to accomplish in your finish. So right now I just want some light grime, some more thinner, and I got some cleanup I need to do above this panel line, so I'm just going to kind of use this as an eraser and clean up anything that went above that. Just making sure I'm still in frame and I'm not covering the surface with my face and head. So if you see, I've been working on this area right here. You know, I got a little bit of grime buildup in this corner, along this edge. A little bit stark right here. And I've been kind of blending that back out. It's hard to tell because I have a lot of lights going on, but there's definitely, when I look at it to the naked eye, there's some definite tonal variety from this to this. It's a little bit richer So it gives it, you know, it stands out a little more. All right, so I got both of the wings done. Like I said, keeping it subtle, just kind of some staining around some panel lines, around the control surfaces a little bit, and then I kind of feathered it out towards the wing tips, keeping it heavy in the wing roots, where all the traffic would be going on, with people walking around and whatnot. So now I'm going to go and kind of work the process into the fuselage as well. So I will check back after I work the fuselage a little bit. All right. All the topside oils with the burnt umber is done. So we got the fuselage done on both sides, the underneath, the nose cone, and the white parts got weathered in a little bit, so they're not so bright, since they would probably get dirtied up. But this is a pretty happy spot. I'm gonna leave it overnight to just kind of cure out, do its thing, and then I'll check it tomorrow, and if it's good to go, I might do some darker streaking and darker grime, but I think I like it like this to just move on to kind of like some wing root dust and grime, and then start to get ready for like exhaust and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we'll check back tomorrow and see how we're looking. All right, I kind of wrapped up the rest of the OPR off camera. After I did all the work on the fuselage, I kind of focused myself on the nose. I did some smoke staining in these gun ports up here, and then I did some engine grease staining at the kind of the intersections of the engine covers. So right here, it's a little bit darker around here. So now that was some thicker oils, so I'm gonna let those kind of just like cure out. Since they are thicker, they'll take a little bit longer than the rest of the oils that usually kind of set up overnight, and then you can kind of manipulate over them. So I'm just gonna leave that alone, and the only real kind of OPR left to do is on some of the smaller parts. All right, even though I'm quote-unquote done with OPR, I'm still gonna save my palette as I move on through the build in case I need it. It should survive. I'm gonna keep it in the fridge. In the fridge, I've heard that you could get this to stay up to a month, a little bit longer. So I'll just put that away later. If I need it to weather something, or you always find some little thing that you forget to weather in. I'll have that ready to go, so I don't have to go pull oils out, wait again. Those are ready to go. So those will be in the fridge if I need them. If not, I'll dump them after I'm done with the project. Getting ready for exhaust. So what I've done is I've gotten some chocolate and super matte black prepared in a color cup, and it's probably about maybe 5 drops of chocolate with 2 drops of super matte black to get this color here, kind of darkish brownish kind of color. I'm going to use this to do the exhaust with the airbrush, and then I'm also going to do some like dirt and grime on the wing roots. One of the actual interesting photos, actually, this reference back here. See if I can dig it up here. Yeah, I bookmarked it. Yeah, here it is. Make sure I'm not knocking paint over and stuff here. But if you see on this photo here, the entire wing root is just disgusting in here. So, you know, that's a combination of probably exhaust and people climbing in and out and ground crew and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go try to simulate that with the airbrush with that color that I mixed up. I'm going to probably shoot this off camera because I'll admit I kind of suck at shooting exhaust staining as it is, and I kind of am going to have the airplane kind of like in my face up and close, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do it on camera. So I'm going to go do that off camera. I'll come back and show you the results. Okay, so coming back, I got that sprayed up. So the wing root area, basically what I did is I kind of followed the same path I did on the dusting for the bottom. And then I just used the liquid mask, this stuff, put it on with some sponge, and then I sprayed a light coat, a lighter shade of this color. So I know I had the really dark one I just showed you. I just mixed up another one that was a little bit lighter, and then I went with the dark color on top of it. So did the wing roots there, so that kind of looks like this, gives some nice tones. And then I got the exhaust going on both sides with that same color. So I think it looks pretty good. I am a little worried about this one a little bit too dark. So it looks like some of the reference photos that I've seen in that book. So nice and dirty in that wing root, and then the wings are usually nice and clean. Left some access panels, like they've been removed and that kind of stuff, and the exhaust staining flows down the side kind of in a pattern. I kind of kept it one of the longer ones that I saw on there. I just kind of like the look of it. But yeah, so sorry I couldn't show you that, but like I said, when I was spraying it, I had the plane kind of grasp in this hand, and my airbrush was kind of like here, but I was way off camera, so I can make sure that I could get in there and spray nice and tight. And one thing I forgot to mention about that dark color, this was super duper super thin. I think after I did that mix, I probably put in 90% of not this stuff, sorry, of Mr. Color Rapid Thinner, so I could get in there nice and tight, so it wouldn't spider web or get all nasty. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap up this episode of the build of weathering, because I already have, like, now, I think after shooting tonight, about 5 hours worth of footage that I need to cut down to like 45 minutes. So I'm gonna leave it at that. When we come back next, we will probably be starting final assembly. So looking forward to getting this wrapped up, and we'll move on from there. So I'll see you in the next episode.